Alrighty, I said I'd make this video, so now here we are. When I made that big fat world review video, I said I really wanted to break down Lunastra and her Nova in depth. Break down exactly how she works, and why I think the way she works is so fascinating. I think Lunastra stands as one of the most complex monsters they've ever made, and part of why I think she's so disliked is because I think she's a little misunderstood. That, and I do think that some aspects of her were not particularly well communicated. Yes, of course, there's using things like wind resistance and the fireproof mantle. Everybody's given that advice about the Nova. That's the base level stuff, but there's a lot more there, such as how the nature of her Nova charge works, how the properties of her flames operate, how the dynamics of her fight can change drastically with the implementation of the Clutch Claw, and how that interacts with things like hit zones. And I bet there's a lot of stuff about her that many people don't know, because I've always liked Lunastra, and there's a lot of stuff about her that I didn't even know until I did my research. So much so that when I talked about Lunastra in the world review, I had some information that I think I misinterpreted or just straight up didn't understand, and that analysis of her is kind of flawed, actually. So this video is going to break her down much more adequately. At least, I hope so. I could still be wrong about things, I suppose. It happens. But why now? Lunastra came to world like 7 years ago, so who really cares? I think I have something important to say about Lunastra and fights like her, mechanics like hers, but I need to kind of crack open these numbers to properly articulate that point. So you need to understand her for me to actually communicate what I want to say. And I think a lot of people just kind of don't right now. So yes, this is kind of a guide, a very belated guide. It's not a speedrunning guide. It's not an optimization guide. This is not a max DPS guide. It's mostly a mechanical guide. A numerical autopsy with suggestions for techniques that counter her techniques. Such a guide is inherently unoptimized in a damage sense. That's very much on purpose. This is not meant to be the fastest advice or the advice that needs to be taken. With proper set building and very proficient gameplay, you can manhandle Lunastra without taking much of the following into consideration. And if you can, that's awesome. Great work, genuinely. That's not what this video is about. That's not what it's trying to say. So, roll with me here, stick around for the end. I'm pretty impassioned about what I have to say about this. So, let us begin with demystification. Cracking open Lunastra's programming and seeing how she actually works. Numbers make her much less imposing. Now, I do want to preface that some of the strategies and fight information comes from me, some of it comes from other sources. I did have to do my own research to properly understand her, and I can't claim that all of these ideas are my own. Two of my major sources are a Reddit post made by the user Sinfire Titan, who broke down the Nova in simple bullet points, and the Lunastra farming guide made by Jinjinx and Turner. So shout out to those individuals. Right, so first, Lunastra's Nova operates on a charge level. There are 4 levels to this charge, and they will gradually build throughout the battle all on their own. In that sense, it's almost exactly like Teostra's Nova. He'll build and build towards his final explosion, with his visual lighting effects getting more intense as he increases in charge level. Lunastra does the same. When Lunastra's horns start glowing blue, that means she's at stage 4 and the Nova is able to be used. We're going to look at preventative measures against her Nova first. Now, with both Teostra and Lunastra, there are 2 ways to reduce charge level. Tripping them and causing them to fall over, as well as proccing Elder Seal, are both methods that can cut their charge level by 1 every time you successfully pull off either of these effects. If you've ever been bullying a Teostra really badly with several well-placed attacks landed on his head and you're knocking him down all over the place, you may have noticed that he barely, if ever, does his Nova. Well, that's because each tripping knockdown you're dealing to him is cutting his charge level. This can be done without Elder Seal, but running a weapon with that property will also have that draining effect. The same goes for Lunastra. If you trip her up, the charge level for her Nova decreases by 1. If you get Elder Seal to proc, her charge level decreases by 1. Now, what makes Lunastra tricky is a piece of information that you would not be privy to without proper trial and error or looking at her stat sheets on third-party websites. Lunastra's tripping area is not her head, it is instead her legs. Forelegs and hind legs will suffice. Now, in the base game high rank of Monster Hunter World, this is fairly annoying. The best hit zones she has on her legs are a value of 30 on her forelegs with impact damage and a value of 30 on her hind legs with cutting damage. For anyone who needs a refresher, the hit zone value of a monster's part represents the percentage of raw damage that the monster will take from that attack. The same goes for elemental hit zones, which are calculated separately. So this is where you want to hit if you want to trip her, but not only is this not a part break like Teostra's head trip spots, but her damage reduction here is more considerable. Also, remember that in order to proc the weakness exploit skill, a monster's hit zone number must be 45 or higher. So it's going to take more hits and more persistence to take her out at the legs. There were some solid strategies to deal with these limitations in high rank. Honestly, hugging her sides is a pretty safe strategy as she has a lot of big fire attacks that go up forwards in front of her and some quick attack animations that attack with her head. Her face is not always a super safe place to be. Weapons like dual blades are really good at sticking to her torso and landing hits consistently. The bow is just an extremely effective weapon in this game, period, and you can use the arc shot pellets to take advantage of her below average resistance to stun, and gun lance shelling was an effective way to deal with her because its shelling deals true damage, which completely ignores hit zone values. Hitting her legs with wide shell gun lance could get you some pretty consistent topples just because you can get that damage through on her legs with every single shot. But now that we have Iceborne, a couple of new branches have opened up to us. Yes, the Clutch Claw is a very flawed tool with a lot of its own overbearing annoyances, but in places, especially right here, it interacts with hit zones and numbers in such a way that opens up new branching paths of weapon matchups. Some of Lunastra's more important hit zones for Nova mitigation, mainly her forelegs and head, take the most damage from impact weapons. This is what makes the bow really good for this fight, since its pellets deal a lot of impact damage, and her head hit zone has a value of 45 for shot type damage. You can hit her head a lot with a bow for some good results. The head also is not protected by her flame aura. However, you're not really going to be getting your trip staggers on her forelegs easily with those arc shot pellets. Yeah, sure, you can run hammer against her, but her head is incredibly dangerous and her legs have pretty rough hit zones for a slower weapon like hammer to trip her consistently. Fortunately for us, Lunastra has a hit zone value of 30 for impact on her forelegs, and those forelegs can be tenderized with the Clutch Claw. A hit zone value of 30 is a lovely number for us because when plugged into the tenderization formula, we get a value of 47.5, rounded down to 47, I believe. And what number are we looking for weakness exploits? 45. Now, does this overrule the other weapon matchups against Lunastra and give us a clear, new, definitive best option against her? Definitely not. But I hope you're starting to see where I'm getting at with the overarching point of this video. Having this knowledge is cool. Understanding her Nova, her numbers, how the Clutch Claw works, how Iceborne itself works, it gives us a new strategy that we can use against her. What we have here is the ability to open up a path where we can turn Lunastra's trip zone into a proper weak spot using one specific damage type. So we bring a dragon hammer or a hunting horn with us to fight a Lunastra. We tenderize the legs. She starts fighting, starts charging up gradually, and now we have what the game categorizes as a weak spot on her tripping zone. We knock her down, kill a level of that charge, put her on the ground. Now we have easy access to her head, which is a weak spot that's usually very dangerous to attack. This area has an impact value of 60, which can be bumped up to a 70 when tenderized. From here, not only can we use the impact damage of our hammer to push her towards a KO, which she is also susceptible to, but putting her on the ground like this and then setting her up for another knockdown is going to give us a lot of room to start building up Elder Seal, which when procced will then cut her charge level again. This, of course, is just one strategy, and naturally it's execution based, but that's something you're only really going to be able to piece together if you take a look under the hood and demystify how this fight operates. Heck, if we want to theorycraft even more, why not use Charge Blade? Impact files on a Charge Blade deal true raw damage as well, giving you the same damage reduction ignoring property as gun lance shelling, while also dealing important impact damage for tripping her. It is worth noting that this means tenderizing will not affect file damage, which of course means that you need to worry less about tenderizing. You also now have cutting damage to attack her wings and tail with. Remember though that this isn't a permanent get out of jail free card. KO and Elder Seal operate similar to statuses. They have built up meters, and monsters will gradually heighten their resistances to them to a maximum resistance level. You still have to build the rest of your set well and be good at the fight, but a well-used Dragon Hammer has the ability to trip her, Elder Seal proc her, and KO Lunastra, and the Clutch Claw makes this a lot more viable now. The other thing worth keeping track of is Lunastra's maximum charge move. I misunderstood this attack for a very long time. I was under the impression that this mechanic was what charged the Nova, that all you needed to do was interrupt it to stop her from detonating. That is not the case. As we just established, the Nova charges itself in 4 tiers passively at all times. The maximum charge stance is a shortcut that Lunastra can risk by clearing distance and standing still for several seconds. If this animation is completed, she will automatically go into stage 4 of her charge. Now here's something interesting. In Lunastra's programming, the Nova isn't exactly its own attack. It replaces the maximum charge stance. So if she's at charge level 4, and her AI calls for the charging maneuver, it Novas instead. It doesn't have a hard timer on it. You kinda just need to get an approximate feel for how long it might take between charge attempts before using certain countermeasures. This is one thing I think could be improved about the fight. For example, in the 4th generation, Teostra had his supernova, and that had a fairly strict timer on it. When he entered his rage state, I believe you had 90 or 100 seconds before he exploded. It depended on if he was in the middle of an attack animation or not, but roughly it was around that 90 to 100 second threshold. Now, it's not like people were setting up a timer on their phone for 90 seconds to track the Nova, but if you have that kind of hard timer, what it does is it kind of embeds itself in your subconscious a little. It gives you an internal clock where you can kind of feel out when he'll explode. I'm simply more of a fan of that method. Now, a few things worth noting about the maximum charge stance as we try and prevent Lunastra from detonating. Number 1, if she does pull off the maneuver, this is not game over. All it does is automatically put her in stage 4. If you've been paying attention, you should know that this means we have time to knock her back down. She is not hard locked into phase 4. She's merely jumped to it. I'm sure you're also aware of the fact that attacking her while in this charge stance can force her out of it. If she takes too many hits, she will forfeit the charge to defend herself. Be quick though, as she will attack in the direction you're standing in, and she will typically use pretty fast moves to counter you. Our friend the Clutch Claw makes his return here once more. If Lunastra is not enraged, you can grapple to her head and force turn her with a claw strike, and that's a guaranteed safe cancellation of the stance. Honestly, could very well be another free knockdown for you too. Might be worth not speedrunning the agitator activation with Clutch Claw turns against her, just so that you have that extra resource on hand as often as possible. What's important to know is that this stance is not the be-all and end-all. Not for her, and not for you. If you cancel her out of this stance, she does not lose the charge levels that she already had. Her naturally occurring buildup will remain. She can detonate even if she never succeeds with her auto charge animation. On the other hand, if she is successful, you still have time to trip her and Elder Seal her before she detonates. Let's talk about other damage types to throw at her. Cutting damage has a little bit of a rough spot here. Its 2 best zones are her wings and her tail. Tail can be a bit tough to hit consistently, and her wings are only ever going to get touched in melee when she's down on the ground. The head is still a fine enough spot to hit, but it isn't the best place. Impact weapons mostly want to be just to the head, which is tricky because of how many large vicious frontal attacks she has. Though the Clutch Claw does give us some new options with her forelegs. Gunning weapons have a pretty decent time enjoying good zones on her head and her tail. This is why the bow was one of the main weapons used to take her down. Of course, the Clutch Claw can remedy some of these problems, and we discussed some tactics with Hammer earlier. When it comes to elements, you have 2 options. If you want to be running an elemental dedicated DPS build against her, your choice is Ice. This will sacrifice the Elder Seal, but will simply do more damage. Your next option is Dragon. If you're using a dragon weapon, you more so want the Elder Seal than you want the dragon damage. Her dragon hit zones aren't heinous, but they are 5 weaker than every equivalent ice hit zone. If you run Dragon dragon weapons for Elder Seal, my recommendation is to just take a weapon that is Elder Seal high and then build for raw damage. The latent dragon element will simply be a nice addition. Elder Seal is an odd stat in this game, but fortunately you don't really need to do anything to build for it. From what my research into it has dug up, it does not scale with raw damage or with dragon damage. It is a fully independent stat. When you deal damage with a dragon weapon, Elder Seal builds up on a status meter just like poison or paralysis would. When that meter hits a threshold, the Elder Seal property procs, the meter resets, and the meter will then get longer, making the monster more resistant to Elder Seal. This will eventually cap out at a maximum resistance limit. Elder Seal operates, if my information is correct, on a very basic level. Elder Seal low has a value of 4, medium has a value of 6, high has a value of 8. Deal attacks, and you add these numbers to the Elder Seal proc meter. So, if we want to bleed Lunastra's Nova Charge levels, grab a dragon weapon with Elder Seal high, build for raw damage, and then hit her. The few extra ticks of dragon damage will knock off a couple overall hits from your runtime. If you really want to build for dragon element, you can, but it will be less effective than ice. Do not use water weapons against her. I do not care that they can put out her fire puddles, it's not worth it. She's borderline immune to water damage. If you have to put out the fire puddles, just use the puddle pod slinger ammo. Before we move on to the Nova itself, let's talk about a few more quick notes. If we're absolutely desperate and Lunastra is about to do the Nova, it is possible to flinch her out of the animation. This can be through raw damage, or if you have a good shot with things like Crystal Burst and Dragon Pods hitting her in the head, that can cancel the animation with a flinch, if you nail that timing. Should you manage to get this flinch, her AI will still read out that she instigated the Nova, and her timer is going to reset back to 1. Alternatively, flash pods should be evaded unless you know what you're doing. If she is flashed, she will automatically rush to the next level of Nova Charge, and if she is already at level 4, she will Nova immediately. We will return to flash pods soon. Thirdly, team composition is important. Some coordination with your fellow hunters can absolutely help, but another thing you can do if running Lunastra solo is outfoot your Palico with paralysis. If you're looking to tackle those Elder Seal procs, getting 1 or 2 chances to lock her down in place could be extremely useful. Mounting, of course, will also give you large openings. And finally, when Lunastra limps to her nest and sleeps, she will stockpile power and awaken with a free level 4 charge. This, I think, was what I was talking about in my world review when I said that she got a Nova for free at some point during the fight. I think I misunderstood the information I was given and made it sound more random than it actually is. This is far more trackable than I had originally thought and makes way more sense. That doesn't mean I think it's a good idea though. I understand the logic. She's sleeping, she's building in power while resting, and awakened partially rejuvenated, but it is an almost completely free bypass of her charging mechanic if she is allowed to sleep. Of course, if you're fast enough, you can simply not let her go to bed, but giving her the ability to max charge with none of the buildups or drawbacks does cut into what I find to overall be a very sensible and fair set of mechanics around her attack. All that being said, we know well by now that a level 4 charge does not mean that the Nova is destined to happen. She can still be knocked out of her charge if you're aggressive enough. Even with all of these tricks, you are still likely to be facing down her detonation at least once unless you're playing very well. You may be able to stop her multiple times from letting her get to full power, but you should prepare for the possibility of it happening. Her resistances to stun, mounts, and Elder Seal will grow as the fight goes on, and these preventative measures will gradually get less consistent for you. This is the part you're probably the most versed in. Most Lunastra guides seem to accept that the Nova is inevitable and merely teach you how to survive it. Personally, I don't think nearly enough of them teach you how to fight it, which was the purpose of the last 7 pages of the script or so. The Nova is stacked with mechanics, all of which are easy to understand. It does a large amount of continuous fire damage. Simultaneously, she will litter large chunks of the battlefield with flaming pools that do extra damage. Her initial landing will create a large radius of wind that will stagger you, and she will also let out an additional burst of radial wind pressure at certain times that will keep you in perpetual stun lock. If you're directly under her when the Nova goes off, there will be a large explosion of damage under her that can knock you back. These wind bursts can agitate the fire puddles as well, causing them to burst and deal additional knockback damage if you're standing in them. I believe these fire puddles are consistent in placement. I'm not absolutely positive, but I think that's the case. Fun fact, right in front of her, usually if this is consistent, lacks those puddles. So if you know what you're doing, you can actually get right up in her face while she's animation locked. Health recovery augments are a thing, by the way. You can use them and just chug through the fire damage. This next bit, I'm also not 100% sure on, but I'm highly certain certain that if she engages the Nova of her own accord, specifically her Arch-Tempered version in high rank and her Master rank version, she will roar before doing the Nova. I believe that the regular high rank Lunastra does not do this. This is another change that I dislike. I think it's more cruel than it needs to be. The initiation of her Nova is already fast enough that it can be a scramble to block or evade or sheathe to recover yourself before the blasts and the wind pressure go off. But now, in these more dangerous versions of her battle, you might not even get that chance to scramble because you may be stun locked by her roar and then unable to do anything to prevent the oncoming slew of staggers and fire damage. I would do away with this completely, honestly. Other Novas don't do this. Teostra doesn't roar before he does his supernova. Safi doesn't stun lock you before he does Sapphire of the Emperor. Elatrion's Eschaton Judgment doesn't come with anything like this. Fatalis' gigantic flame breath attacks have like a little bit of wind pressure when he does his takeoff, but it's way more merciful than this. I am not a fan of her roaring before she does the Nova. If Lunastra comes back, I don't think this guaranteed or near guaranteed roar on windup should be there at all. However, we do need to go back to flash pods real quick before we continue. I said earlier that you kind of want to refrain from using flash pods unless you know what you're doing, since they can force Lunastra's charge level to increase, and if she's at maximum charge already, she'll auto-detonate. Well, we also talked about the fact that she does not have a set timer before she Novas, yeah? Well, what if we can force the Nova out on her own terms then? Whether you have a shield weapon and you know how to intercept her fire bursts, or perhaps you purposefully disengage, get to a safe distance, then flash bomb her and continue to run to get out of range, you can effectively force Lunastra into controlled detonations entirely on your own terms to take the chance factor out of the Nova completely. We were talking about Nova preparation earlier, which is why I didn't mention this, but now that we're talking about Nova survival, being able to force the attack manually can 100% contribute towards that survival. And here's the kicker. I believe the design intention for the Nova is to scare the crap out of you with an instantaneous response. So if you flash her, she goes into the Nova immediately. Ergo, no roar stun, which I just complained about. This is a super cool exploit. Most players would think, okay, so never flash pod her ever under any circumstances, but with a little more creativity applied, you recognize that, oh, if I want, I have complete and utter control over this attack so long as she's at maximum charge. Now, does this mean that I forgive the random chance Nova and the roar stun lead up? No, I still don't like those aspects of this attack, but we live in a world where they are there, so this is how you deal with it. It's an awesome solution to a problem that I have issues with. Briefly, we can talk about skills, gear, and tactics to survive the Nova. I say briefly because this is the information everybody has given. Anyone who's made a Lunastra guide will primarily stick to the tools you want to use to deal with the inevitable Nova explosion spam. Everything up till this point in this video has had the purpose of teaching you why this next segment is probably the least important part of understanding Lunastra. But hey, there's always a non-zero chance that she's going to get the Nova off, even if you use some of these tricks. You still want to survive, of course. So we're dealing with continuous fire damage, explosion knockback, roar stun, and wind pressure. If you're going to slot in a defensive skill, wind resistance is your better bet. Not only are you not going to get locked down for the whole Nova, so you have free reign to run around, but Lunastra has wind pressure on a couple of her other attacks, so the skill has some persisting value. Also worth noting that if you wear 3 pieces of Kushala Daora, you get maximum wind resistance for free, and that set comes with some pretty handy skills like Handicraft, Evade Extender, Evade Window, and Ice Attack, so that might not be a bad investment to counterpick against Lunastra. Earplugs is a nice enough comfy skill, but you definitely don't want both, since then you have to invest 10 skill points to max out both of them. Honestly, if you keep wind resistance, even if you get knocked back by the initial Nova impact, you'll probably be fine if you have a decent amount of health remaining. Just stay away from the fire puddles and heal while she's animation locked. Fire resistance is an option, but that's also going to be cutting into your skill list. If you want to tank or fire damage, do 2 things. Eat for elemental resistance large before a quest, and bring a fireproof mantle. That will give you a lot of fire damage resistance, some of it being permanent off of the food buff, and the mantle will give you a couple of periods of 3 minutes where her flames can do barely anything to you. The fireproof mantle is a safe bet since it has a fixed integrity. It won't chip from hits. So if she hits phase 4, you can swing that thing on and you'll have a large grace period where her Nova can happen at any time and you'll have a ton of fire damage absorption. The temporal mantle is an alright idea. It will automatically dodge every instance of her explosion, but that means you're probably only going to be using it for her Nova, and as we just established, that's a little bit tough to track. I have heard people suggest not using the Rocksteady mantle against her, but I kind of disagree, honestly. The danger of the Rocksteady Mantle is that you take 0 knockback, so if you get hit by her fire attacks, you will then continue to take lingering chip damage. You'll take every single instance of damage coming at you with no imposed invincibility frames to protect you. In my experience, this is a potential danger that rarely ever actually manifests, especially if we're using the tactic of hugging her torso and attacking her legs. You're not getting chip damage obliterated to death all that often. Her fiery explosions usually hit at mid-range. The Rocksteady Mantle is nice because it simply couldn't give a crap about wind pressure or roar stun, neither will affect you at all. So from there, you can sheathe, ignore the wind and explosions of the Nova, stay out of the fire puddles, and heal. Astera Jerky is the recommended healing item to use since her flame aura will deal red health damage, which the Jerky can heal all of consistently. Max potions are also an option if you want to use them. Rocksteady is also nice if you want to go with the hammer strategy because you can tenderize her legs nice and easy. If I want to slot for utility over damage, sometimes I'd like to put Tool Specialist on my Fireproof Mantle so I have 3 minutes of accelerated recovery time on my Rocksteady, and I'll sometimes put Quick Sheath on my Rocksteady Mantle so that I can get to my healing items more quickly. Or you can just go for more damage skills. Whatever you like. You don't have to use offensive skills at all if you don't want to. If you block or dodge the roar, another surefire strategy is to quickly sheathe your weapon, turn, sprint, and Superman dive over and over again using its invincibility frames to prevent you from taking damage. This is much harder to do now that she roars before the Nova though. Another reason I do not like that feature. Additionally, if you're beneath her when she goes to do her Nova, you might actually be kind of safe if your health is really high. She'll slam down and she'll hit you and put you in a full knockdown. From there, you can delay your get up by not touching any of the buttons or the analog sticks and use the prolonged iframes to not take any chip damage from the fire while you're down. You may be actually lucky, stand up in a fire puddle, take that damage, get put in another iframe knockdown again, and just let yourself get explosion juggled to keep yourself alive. It's crude, but it can work if your health is high enough. The worst place to be for her Nova is at mid-range with no defenses. If that happens, yeah, then you're probably gonna die. In most other circumstances though, as long as you're not on low health, you can probably survive the Nova using one of several proposed defensive techniques. Want more options to Survivor? Alright, let's talk about team composition. There are hunting horns in the game that can apply wind pressure negate, and some that can grant earplugs to the entire team. You can run one of those horns, then keep the song buff up consistently, and then your whole squad doesn't need to slot in for those skills, compromise on their damage list at all. You can have one guy have wind resistance and use group healing items to keep the team alive through the Nova. You can even run the Choral Orchestra gadget on your Palico and have them focus on the Cheer Bongo, which has the chance to give you negate environmental damage for 120 seconds, which is good against her fire pods, or he can give you the negate wind pressure buff for 180 seconds. It's not the most consistent counter, but it's another option. It's there. And there you go. That's what, like a dozen pages of script on just Lunastra, her Nova, and the surrounding elements of their design. That's a lot. I didn't even cover the rest of her attacks, which are solid by the way. Her whole entire battle isn't my favorite by any stretch, but it's definitely good. A lot of nice big attacks, some moves that are fun to iframe, generally solid tells, but it's all that other stuff that I think is the most important. My hope is that I've painted you a good enough picture of just how mechanically dense Lunastra is, how rich in ideas she is, how much of her design is complemented by the tools that Iceborne gives us. My hope is that I've destroyed the myth of this random unfair bullshit Nova attack and properly illustrated just how it works and how much autonomy and control you have over this battle. If you're curious, I'll tell you about my experiences. I do not regularly play Hammer and Iceborne. I have never fought Lunastra with one. On my first attempt running Hammer on Lunastra using the Elder Seal trip strategy, never died once. It took me 20 minutes to put her down. In that 20 minutes, she performed her Nova once. Just once. And I survived it as I got knocked back with a Fireproof Mantle on. On my second run, I shaved 5 whole minutes off of that time, locked her out of the Nova completely. She never performed it once, over 15 minutes. She even successfully pulled off the maximum charge stance, and I knocked her charge level down and then kept it down. My second time facing her with Hammer, using an unoptimized build with a strategy that is not tailored for maximum damage outputs, using weapon I don't play too often, and I played well enough to lock her Nova down completely for 15 whole minutes. That's how cool this tactic is. Now look, I'm not gonna pretend that this is some grand revelation that only I figured out. I do not claim to be the one person who fights her correctly or who fights her the best. I don't mean to say that I'm presenting you with the greatest way or only way of fighting her. Go watch a Lunastra speedrun. I doubt they use too many of the ideas that I've tossed out in this video, and they know her entire battle better than I do. That's not the point. The point of this video is that my techniques aren't cool because they're the best. They're cool because they're there at all. and because they matter. Look, let's be honest, a lot of Monster Hunter fights, especially nowadays, predominantly come down to your knowledge of a monster's moveset versus your knowledge of your weapon's moveset. That's a lot of what you're dealing with. Things like part break locations, weak points, elemental resistances, and some defensive skill use here or there can factor in, for sure, but Monster Hunter doesn't always reward you for knowing the numerical values of hit zones against certain damage types. The internal workings of super attack timers, the functionings of things like Elder Seal, the way to manipulate monster AI, the utility of different defensive skills and tools in implementing multi-step strategies, and then having that reward for your knowledge be surviving and controlling an insanely dangerous attack. Sure, all of that knowledge is definitely applicable to other monsters. The math is there for all of them, but do you need it? Not all the time, not really. Did you ever need to know about Teostra's Nova timer? Do you need to know about head tripping and Elder Seal locking for him? Not that much. Yeah, his Nova hits pretty hard, but it's easy enough to escape. It's pretty well telegraphed, it's got a long windup to it, and if you're anywhere over 80% health, you can kind of just tank it and probably live. Having those fun facts about him is really cool, and you'll have insight into about why you're locking him down so badly, but is it needed info? Not as much. You could say, well, all this information is neat and all, but I don't like that it's attached to this super powerful, crazy kill move, but that's kind of the point, right? If there's never any fights that push you to learn these mechanics, then what are they for? Isn't a fight like this kind of intriguing? That not every, but a select few fights in this series really encourage you to take advantage of all this extra information beyond simply what the attacks do. And with Lunastra, it's not even like not knowing all this information means you're absolutely going to lose the fight. It just makes it a bit tougher to manage and survive. You might still just slap on wind resistance and ice weapon and the fireproof mantle and say, there, I've made a counter build against Lunastra. But there's so much technical stuff baked in here that no, you actually kind of haven't. That's a band-aid. Isn't that kind of cool? Now, I don't want them to all be like this. Hell, I don't want every endgame Monster Hunter monster to be like this. Sometimes you need an Arkveld or a Malzeno who are simply very well structured, bloody battles with super fun movesets to engage with, and nothing too much beyond that. Sometimes you should have fights that just dabble in extra details, like Barioth's trip-ups on claw breaks, and Barioth's shifting elemental weaknesses depending on the status of his mud armor, or the shifting hit zone values of the metal wraths, and how those alter due to part breaks in Hellfire mode, or Raknikadaki's alternating moveset depending on whether or not she has her silk armor, and learning how to effectively remove that from her. Monsters like that are great. Monsters that push you towards a little bit of knowledge about those more subtle numbers. But I think that there should be some monsters that push those aspects of Monster Hunter to their limits, that encourage you to really learn how a monster functions. Lunastra is an opponent where damage type, elemental damage, hit zone values, tripping zones, Elder Seal, mantles, the clutch claw, defensive skills, slinger use, palico gadgets, status build-up, mount timing, weapon matchups, and moveset knowledge are all relevant. Not mandatory, not forced, relevant. She is just dangerous enough that having all of this knowledge grants you immense control over her battle, and yet she is not so dangerous that you will absolutely die and fail if you do not possess or implement all of this knowledge. Alatreon is a fight that gets compared to Lunastra, as they are both pretty mechanically deep and were fairly controversial when they came out. Of the two, I think Alatreon is more forgiven these days because he's pretty well understood to this point, and a bit simpler. Lunastra is still perceived as this weirdo, slapdash, poorly structured monster that you can use defensive skills to survive against, but that doesn't necessarily make her fun. I think that Alatreon is overall a more enjoyable battle who does what he does with more polish, a better communicated gimmick, and a better broad moveset. Lunastra's advantage over Alatreon, though, is player autonomy. Her Nova is far less scripted and has a lot more behind-the-scenes facets to it. I just spent however long explaining them all to you, the preventative, survival, matchup, and control options that you have for her fight. That's where Lunastra's design excels. That's what's so cool about her, about a fight like this. Her parameters grant you a lot of artistic expression with your sets to properly deal with her. Whereas with Alatreon, it's elemental building, or just raw damage right through Eschaton Judgment and try to tank through that. Lunastra's mechanics are simultaneously so dangerous, but also so wishy-washy and kind of nebulous that it grants you this web of methods that you have and lots of room to pick and choose how you want to go in for the approach. She might be one of the most strategically diverse monsters out there. So what went wrong then? Why did she get the reputation that she got? Did the developers fail to communicate how she functions? Did parts of the player base just not put any effort into learning how this fight works? A little bit of both. I'm gonna be honest, some of this stuff can totally be found out through trial and error. Oh, her head is really dangerous and does a lot of big blowing fire attacks everywhere. Maybe I don't want to be by her head all the time. Okay, I'll go more towards her torso. Hey wait, if I hit her legs a bunch, she topples over more. And I know that Elder Seal does something to mitigate Elder Dragon powers, so maybe it affects her Nova or her Fire Aura. Let's test out which. Okay, the Fire Aura's not going away, but the Nova's happening less frequently, so maybe Elder Seal proc does affect the Nova. Interesting. Okay, so I don't want to Flash Pot her because if I do that, it triggers the Nova. But wait a minute. If it triggers the Nova, then that means I could potentially force her to do it when I'm really far away. And then she seems to be able to do the Nova even if I stop her from doing that wind-up animation, so maybe there's something else I don't know about it. I think all of that stuff is discoverable without guides and without the game telling you what to do. There is a lot of stuff here that I think is attempting to respect your intelligence and wants you to try and fail and learn and adapt. And then, of course, the ability to block roars, wind, and fire damage is all very discoverable through skills, mantles, and gadgets and team composition. That's easy. On the other hand, it's pretty damn tough to recognize that Lunastra and Teostra have this strict passive charging mechanic that operates in tiers of 4. There's some lighting effects to designate that they're building in power, but the 4 phases specifically, and the fact that these 4 phases can be manually reduced through both Elder Seal and tripping, is a little tough to piece together without any prior information. Also, the in-game weak point indicator with the star system and World's Hunter notes is garbage. Doesn't tell you anything. Her forelegs aren't even listed there. It doesn't tell you that her legs are a trip zone, though again, like I said, I think you can figure that one out by yourself. This is why Rise's Hunter notes are better, and it baffles me why they reverted it in Wilds. Iceborne doesn't tell you what the formula for the Clutch Claw is, or that 45 is the target minimum value that you want for weakness exploits. Additionally, let's face it, especially for World and even by the standards of most of Monster Hunter, Lunastra is very technically ambitious. There's not a lot of hunts in World that really push you towards problem solving on this level. Maybe you want a defensive skill here or there for some of the other monsters, but for the most part, you can coast through that game while using just damage skills and solid moveset knowledge and little else. And then boom, they dropped one of the most elaborate monsters they've ever made into the game. Kinda out of the blue. You can certainly think for yourself and use trial and error to figure out Lunastra, but that doesn't mean that World was particularly good at teaching you to think in that way, if that makes sense. It kind of made her feel very abrupt. And like I said, even by the standards of Monster Hunter's whole history, World's Lunastra is complicated. But there are more fights a little bit like her in the classic titles. Generations 1 and 2 especially have some really neat super niche techniques and counter strategies to them. Since the monsters borrowed a ton of animations from one another in those games, they had to play around with hit zones and item use a little bit more to keep the fights diverse, since they could be super samey on a surface level. If you know how the older games work, you can headlock monsters into oblivion, but you have to know how many hits you need and when to hit them. One of the coolest things I know about is that players would build for true damage using gun lances and barrel bombs to counter the armor state of the old generation Fatalises, which typically soak up a ton of damage and force weapons to bounce. There's also the complexities of some of the second generation Elder Dragons, including their repel mechanics, the health thresholds they needed for part breaks, and the need for part breaks and statuses to eliminate their defensive auras. Stuff like this has been diminishing in Monster Hunter. If you ever hear any of the old heads say that Monster Hunter fights nowadays are all the same and it's nothing but an action game now, this is what they're talking about. I don't agree with that statement at all. I think it's ridiculous, but I get where it's coming from. Monster Hunter has had a priority shift, and that shift has been occurring for a long time now. It was not just World. Fights where the intimate knowledge of all these small hidden values and how that information can help you concoct strategies to fight the monsters are a little bit of a dying breed. Movesets for monsters and weapons have been getting more intricate and diverse by the entry, and the gameplay philosophy shift between subtle numerical differences and overt moveset differences has been a thing since at least the third generation. I don't think either is necessarily better or worse or more intrinsically Monster Hunter than the other, but the shift has been happening. What Lunastra was and is, I think, was an attempt to blend both those gameplay philosophies. Her base moveset is almost completely different from Teostra's in World, whereas they were more or less the same in Generation 2. So she's her own beast in terms of attacks, a fresh new challenge for you to learn that's different from any other monster, and matches against the weapons in the game entirely in her own way, like a lot of 5th generation fights. Simultaneously, she is among the more subtly complex monsters, having an attack that's very dangerous. However, it can be manipulated, controlled, eliminated, and ignored, not with brute force, but through tech exploitation. Was it perfect? No. Hers is not the most fun fight ever. It's a very AoE dependent moveset, a little bit spastic right up in front of her, and has a couple of obnoxious hit zones, but at the same time, she's pretty fun to iframe, has some good telegraphs to her, has some bigger, slow attacks, and gives you a lot of openings to hit if you know what you're looking for. And the Nova has the roar stun, which I find unnecessary, the free charge when she goes to sleep, which feels like cheating, the random timer for the detonation, which makes it tough to predict for mantle use, and the fire puddles have an upward cone hitbox when they explode that their animation does not properly convey. I think Elatrion is a more successful attempt at building a monster like this, but I do think Lunastra is pretty well put together still. I think player autonomy and depth of options is what puts Lunastra over a lot of other monsters in terms of being a more technical creation. There's a million viable ways to approach this battle. I think that's awesome. I think that's fascinating. It's what makes her special, memorable, unique. I think Monster Hunter needs some fights like this scattered around. If the series is gonna have all these tools and all these mechanics and all of these numbers, I think you should make monsters that insist that you learn how to use them. At least a couple, a small amount of them. I think knowledge check monsters explore just how rich and dense this series is in a way that a monster with just a really fun moveset can't. If that's not your favorite kind of fight, that's cool, I get it. You don't have to like Lunastra or Elatrion, but I'm of the opinion that things like this need to exist. They're needed to legitimize the technical depth of the series. If all of these tools are only ever a novelty, if the best way is always nothing but big numbers, then I think you abandon a very special aspect of Monster Hunter. There should be monsters that you can't just brute force, or if you want to just brute force it, you have to be very good at it. So how is that? What do you think of Lunastra now? Gonna go fight her again? Try some of this stuff out? Did you learn anything new from this video? What are some other niche technical complexities in Monster Hunter that you enjoy? Let me know. And if you want to hear my love letter to Lunastra's companion, I've got an old video highlighting all the stuff I love about Teostra, my all-time favorite monster, and you can check that out here. But as for now, this has been CR-Volcanic or Connor. I'll see you around.